long-term debt. So this would typically be in case of term loans. Let us say vehicle loan, term loan, जहाँ पे हम लोग next 12 months के जो अपने payments थे with respect to the long-term debt, so those which are falling in the next term, 12 months is to be shown as a current liability. तो अभी तक क्या दिखाते थे current liabilities में, under other current liabilities we used to show current maturities of long-term debt. Now it is being reclassified that current liabilities में इसको short-term borrowings में आपको दिखाना है. That is the change. So typically what can happen here is that, so it is just a reclassification from one of the head to the other head within current liabilities, but maybe there can be an impact in the ratios. Let us say the company, your client has not considered this current maturities of long-term debt, which till now was getting reflected under other current liabilities for the purpose of calculation of, let us say, debt equity ratio or debt service coverage ratio or any such ratio which it was linked to debt, because intentionally or unintentionally this was left out because it was classified under other current liabilities and not as a borrowing. But now it is coming up as a short-term borrowing. It is being reclassified as a short-term borrowing, and therefore that might impact some of the ratio calculations which earlier might erroneously have been computed by not considering this current maturities as a part of the debt or as a part of short-term borrowings. So that is one thing which the client needs to take care of if they have given any ratios in relation to this amount. The next change, or I would say the next disclosure, is about the trade payables aging schedule. So till now we always had the requirement of giving the trade receivables aging schedule. Now the requirement is of the trade payables aging schedule. So these are the 4 buckets that have been prescribed: less than 1 year, 1 to 2 years, 2 to 3 years, and more than 3 years. And then there is a total. So these are with respect to the overdue amounts. So it is from the due date. So what the guidance note of the institute says that typically then there should be 2 more columns added, because the total of the this table should match with the total of the trade payables that has been disclosed on the face of the financial statements as a trade payable. ये दोनों total match होने चाहिए. So what the guidance note says, आपको एक column add करना है with respect to not due. So any amount of the trade payable which is not due. Let us say some material has been received on 25th of March or some services has been received on 25th of March, where there is a 15-day or a 30-day credit period, which means as on 31st of March, that amount is not yet due. You might have booked the liability, but it is not yet due. So these are all, ये table जैसे मैंने कहा is from the due date. So you need to add one column about amounts which are not yet due. That should be one column. And second is with respect to the unbilled amounts. So what is unbilled amounts with respect to the trade payables? When I say, see, many of the companies where, there is the ERP softwares like SAP or things like that, what happens is when they prepare, when a goods receipt note, let us say the material has been received in their factory or a godown or their workshop, they prepared a GRN, so a goods receipt note, then automatically on receipt of the GRN, what happens is the related expense or the inventory gets debited, and there is a corresponding credit to the GRIR, the goods received register ledger, I would say, or a SRIR, service received ledger. Now this ledger, when you are preparing the financial statements, because the goods or services has been received, it's just the invoice which is pending to be received from the vendor, from the supplier, and therefore this amount, it gets clubbed under your trade payables when we do the whole mapping with the financial statements. So to that extent, the guidance note says that you should have a column of unbilled, because these amounts are unbilled amounts where the invoice is yet to be received, and therefore you have 2 additional columns. One is unbilled and second is with respect to not due. So those 2 plus these 4, आपका total जो है वो financial statements trade payables के साथ match हो जाना चाहिए. That is one part. Second is, if you see, the classification is between MSME and others, as well as disputed of MSME and disputed of others. So typically you would find that it is disputed, undisputed, MSME and others. So friends, I would also request that you should advise your client that whatever the numbers जो plot हो रहे हैं, उनको एक बार properly, thoroughly check करें, because let us say there would be times when under the MSME you will find an amount, let us say 5 lakhs. It might be MSME or others, 2 to 3 years, and it is undisputed, right? So then as an auditor, it becomes your responsibility to question that for 2 to 3 years, an amount is outstanding, which is undisputed. How come the vendor is not asking for the payment and your client is not making the payment? Right? I believe as an auditor, you will have to address these issues and find out that whether these balances are real balances or not real balances, and necessary adjustments if required in the financial statements would have to be made. Second thing is that similarly, whatever comes under dispute, let us say that 5 lakhs is not undisputed, but under MSME or others, the client is classifying it as a dispute. Then as an auditor, you should have adequate documentation with respect to the dispute. क्या dispute है उसके लिए आपके पास adequate auditor documentation होने चाहिए, रहने चाहिए आपकी फाइल में. So what exactly is a dispute? So a dispute, not necessarily it is to be a legal dispute. मतलब advocate की notice या court case, not necessary. That is definitely a dispute, but that is not the only dispute. The dispute can be with respect to quantity. Let us say जो delivery quantity की है, there is a difference in that. There might be a dispute with respect to the quality. जो specifications order में थे और जो specifications item या service जो delivery हुई है, there is a difference between that, and therefore there is a dispute that your client has raised with respect to that trade payable. There can be also a dispute with respect to the timing of the delivery. So let us say something was ordered on 5th of March by your client, which ultimately got supplied on 20th or 25th of March. Now your client has disputed that because of this delay of 15 to 20 days, he has incurred some business loss, which he has asked the vendor that you will have to share this or you have to make this good, and therefore there is a dispute. So there can be a number of reasons for the dispute, but I would say as an auditor, what you need to do is that you must have proper documentation with respect to dispute. And a dispute would not be that मैंने उनको फोन पे बोला है कि मैं ये पैसा भी नहीं दूंगा, आप ये clear करो. I feel that there should be some proper documentation, written communication by email हो या letter हो या कुछ भी हो, that the client has communicated, and more better if there is a counter confirmation or a response from the vendor that they are agreeing or they are aware that there is your client has raised a dispute and they want to settle it in the best possible manner. So that was with respect to disputed, undisputed. If due date is not mentioned in the invoice, how do you find the overdue? So what the guidance note says is that if the due date is not specified or agreed, then based the transaction date, आपने जिस डेट पे liability books of account में recognize की है, that becomes the due date, because nothing is mentioned and the liability falls due when, as per the applicable accounting standards, as per your commercial contractual terms and everything, you have agreed to pay that amount, you have agreed to that liability by crediting that in your books of account, and therefore that becomes the due date for you, and anything beyond that becomes overdue in the particular case. So that was with respect to the trade payables aging schedule. And friends, like I said earlier, last year के भी आपको बनाने हैं सारे numbers. This table you have to prepare for March 21 also, and therefore the earlier that you start, the better. With respect to the property, plant and equipment.
Sir, one question, sir. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, Anshul.
Yeah, like whether this aging should be disclosed in the schedule of trade payables or notes to accounts.
You can disclose it anywhere because you also have the disclosure with respect to MSME that you are doing. So one thing, friends, I would just like to mention कि आपके MSME वाले disclosure में जो outstanding दिख रहा है, total MSME, that should match with the MSME in 1 and MSME in row 3, disputed, undisputed, that should match. If you ask me, it would make more sense to show it under the trade payables because ultimately मेरे को totals match करवाने हैं. And normally I have seen in many cases जो MSME disclosure भी है because it is relating to trade payables, वो trade payables की note के नीचे ही आता है. So this can be another table under that for the current year as well as for the previous year under the trade payables itself. So there is a cross check and a matching that happens. So you can show it there also, or you can show it separately, but it makes more sense to show it under the trade payables itself.
Thank you, sir.
So on disclosure for property, plant, equipment, friends, here I would just like to share something that normally what I've seen, and you I would just want an agreement from all of you. that, in the note with respect to the property, plant, equipment, what we have is the first column we have is the type of asset. Let us say plant and machinery, furniture, fixture, electric fittings, vehicle, office, whatever it is, immovable property. Then we have the gross block, where we have the opening balance, we have the additions, we have the deletions, adjustments, we have the closing balance. Then we have the depreciation block, opening balance during the year, deletions, adjustments, reversals, closing balance. Then we have the two net block, and niche mein we show is the previous year. One previous year right at the bottom. Right. So how many of us agree? Maybe you can put a thumbs up in the chat or something that this is how the presentation is done with respect to the note on property, plant, equipment, or you can put a yes in the chat box. Great. So most of us do it in this way. Now, I would just like to draw your attention that I believe my personal view again is that this is technically not correct, because the general instructions to schedule 3 says that for each amount we need to give the comparable or the corresponding for the previous year. So जो previous year हम लोग नीचे एक line देते हैं, to that extent it is technically not right with the requirement of schedule 3 and the accounting standard, which means that for plant and machinery current year, for all the amounts, gross block में हम लोग जो 4 दे रहे हैं, depreciation में 4 दे रहे हैं, सबके लिए previous year का भी देना है. Then for the furniture, fixture current year, previous year, vehicles current year, previous year, whatever. So that is what is the disclosure required. Alternately, you can have two tables, one table for the whole of current year, pura movement, another is the full for the previous year. What I would request is that you can download the financial statements, the annual reports of March 21 also of some good listed companies. You can go through the note that is there in the financial statements with respect to the property, plant, equipment. You will find similar disclosures that are being made there for the numbers I'm saying. So on that basis, like I said, आप पूरा structure change करने वाले हो financial statements का. So what would happen is that you will be able to gauge कि भाई आपको कैसे format क्या करना है. तो आप जब पूरा structure change कर रहे हो, तो you will be able to incorporate this change also, so as to be technically correct as far as the presentation and disclosure is concerned. So for the disclosure of property, plant, and equipment, you have the additions, you have the disposals, you have the acquisitions through business combination. So business combination is nothing but a merger, amalgamation, or a demerger that would be there under the business combinations. Then you have any change with respect to revaluation. अगर AS 11 के capitalization है, कुछ AS borrowing cost के related capitalization है, then all those have to be shown separately for each class of assets. So if you read the top line, it says about each class of assets. So we cannot club anything. For each line item, we have to give this separately, and also the depreciation and impairment losses reversal. So this is with respect to the property, plant, and equipment. Very similar disclosure is now required for the intangible assets also with respect to the additions, disposals, acquisition through business combination, revaluation change, though revaluation under AS 26 is not permitted. It is there under Ind AS, but under AS 26 is not permitted. So to that extent, it would be not applicable. And also the amortization and impairment losses with respect to intangible assets. So intangible may be current year, previous year, आपको for each line item देना है, right? So whatever we do for property, plant, equipment, we are required to do for the intangible assets also. There is another reclassification which is there, which is with respect to the security deposits given. So this is on the asset side of the balance sheet. So abhi tak we were showing it under the long-term loans and advances, the security deposits. Now they have to be shown under other non-current assets. So this is just a reclassification change under the schedule 3. So that was division 1. This is division 2 under the Ind AS. It was earlier shown under loans, security deposits. Now they have to be shown under other financial assets. Trade receivables aging schedule. हमने जैसे ट्रेड पेएबल्स एजिंग शेड्यूल था, वैसे ही अभी ट्रेड रिसीवेबल्स एजिंग शेड्यूल है. वहां पे वी हैड 4 कॉलम्स. Here, since हम लोग 6 महीने का पहले से देते थे, so that column is there, less than 6 months, 6 months to 1 year, and then we have 1 year to 2 year, 2 to 3 years, and more than 3 years. Friends, if you remember, हम लोग पहले देते थे secured, considered good, unsecured, considered good, considered doubtful. Those disclosures we were given with respect to the trade receivables. That still continues. In addition to that, abhi usi mein they have given is the bifurcation between disputed and undisputed. So if it is considered good, we have to classify whether it is disputed or undisputed. If there is a significant increase in credit risk, then we have to classify again उसमें भी disputed, undisputed, and credit impaired जो है उसमें भी disputed, undisputed रहेगा. So you can just visualize that. Let us say, if I say there is a trade receivables considered good, undisputed 2 to 3 years. So I believe as an auditor, we need to ask the client, we need to question the client that if this amount is undisputed, then why is it outstanding for 2 to 3 years? What are the communications that are there? And why then is it still being taken under the column or under the details of considered good? 2 से 3 साल में पड़ा है या 3 साल से ज्यादा में है, कोई dispute भी नहीं है, फिर भी considered good कर रहे हैं. तो see, these are the things which would be required to be questioned as an auditor. Friends, बहुत frankly बोलो, I would not be surprised if all these things in the next 1 or 2 years come under XBRL. Abhi XBRL is for the larger companies and all, but I would not be surprised with so much of information and data that is being put up that the government moves everybody into XBRL so that the data extraction and I would say data mining and data analytics becomes easier for the regulators. And therefore, as auditors, even otherwise, I feel that it becomes extremely important to have a detailed scrutiny of the numbers के वो कौन से cell में, मतलब कौन से column में, कौन से row में आ रहे हैं, and what is the justification, what is the audit paper that we have. So like I said, कुछ भी disputed में आता है, तो उसके लिए you must have a proper documentation. Now let us say there is an amount which is disputed, considered good 2 to 3 years. Right? If you ask, then as an auditor, that should also be questioned कि भाई ये dispute में है, 2-3 साल से आया नहीं है या 3 साल ज्यादा से नहीं आया, फिर भी client बोल रहा है it is considered good. What is the basis of that? What are the documentation for that? Maybe if required in some of the cases for trade payables as well as trade receivables, you still might need to want to have a confirmation, a direct confirmation from the vendor or the customer in such typical situations where they are saying it is considered good. जैसे मैंने example दिया है कि ये disputed है, 3 साल से है और फिर भी client बोल रहा है considered good है, उसके against में कोई provisioning नहीं किया है. So whether that is technically right, you must have adequate audit documentation to justify that. Disputed hai, there can be a significant increase in credit risk or there can be a credit impaired. So now what can come into a significant increase in credit risk? Like I said, कि कोई dispute चल रहा है where the client is confident कि हम ये case जीत जाएंगे, therefore I need not make a provision against that. But there is a significant increase in credit risk because it is disputed, right? So you will have to do a lot of analysis with respect to the numbers that are being presented in this table and just cannot plot numbers and say कि चलो ये मेरा trade receivables balance sheet के साथ match हो गया and therefore I am okay with this. Remember, these financial statements will go to the bankers, they will go to the regulators. हम लोग ITR में भी इसको scan करके file करेंगे. MCA में तो जाएगा ही जाएगा, bankers को भी जाएगा, stakeholders को जाएगा. In case your client is into tendering and all, maybe tender के part में financial statements जाएंगे with the notes and all. So there is a lot of information that would now be shared with the stakeholders, where therefore the responsibility as an auditor, like the chairman at the inception mentioned the words of our honorable president, that audit is a serious business. And therefore, we also need to consider that we need to do the proper documentation and analysis of all the numbers. Trade payables में हमने जो भी discuss किया पहले, friends, that 2 more columns to be added in the receivables also. The guidance notes say we have to add those 2 columns. One is not due, and second is with respect to the unbilled revenue. Unbilled revenue specifically जहाँ पे percentage of completion method follow होता है. There I have seen in many cases because the material has been delivered, service has been provided, but because of the contractual terms, the billing does not happen as on 31st of March every year, and there is always a component of unbilled revenue that would be there. And so उसका भी एक column बनाना है, not due का column बनाना, and the total of all these columns, the 5 given over here plus 2 as per the guidance note, 7 का total should match with the balance sheet. With respect to if due date is not mentioned, what would be the due date? We discuss under trade payables, the same funda applies over here also. Also disputed kya hai, undisputed kya hai. So what exactly is a dispute? That also what we discussed under trade payables, copy that. The same thing would be applicable for your trade receivables also. Friends, here also, like we discussed, trade payables में हम लोग MSME का disclosure एक कर रहे हैं table में as per the MSME Act, whatever is the outstanding for MSME as at 31st of March, and we have to match with the MSME outstanding under the aging schedule that we are giving, disputed plus undisputed. Similarly, on the trade receivable side also, when we earlier table हम लोग दे रहे हैं that secured considered good, unsecured considered good, मतलब वो considered good का जो total है secured plus unsecured should match with my considered good disputed plus undisputed. ये दोनों के total और वो दोनों total match होने चाहिए. So I would suggest that when you prepare the Excel, the whole template format जब आप ready करें, please ensure that you put all these checks and balances within the Excel by way of formula, so that it does not happen कि कहीं पे error रह जाए, sign off हो जाए, and when you are uploading somewhere and XBRL or whatever format, there is suddenly an error which gets popped up that ये दो numbers आपके match नहीं हो रहे. But then by that time it would be too late because the AGM would also have been held and you would not be able to revise the financial statements. So please ensure that these checks and balances are inbuilt and you do a proper diligence of the numbers that are being reported. Other information in the balance sheet. So first is where the company has not used the borrowings from banks and financial institutions for the purposes for which it were taken. ये as at balance sheet date reporting करना है, friends. So if it has been used after the balance sheet, before the signing of the financial statements, then also this reporting will come, because as at the balance sheet date, these amounts, these funds which have been borrowed have not been used for the purposes for which they were sanctioned. And यहाँ पे words use किया है borrowings, so they have not specified short term or long term. Therefore, in my view, and as per the guidance note, any borrowings, whether they have been used for the specified purpose or not, that would come as a disclosure in the financial statements. The next is a deletion with respect to the SBN specified bank notes. Demonetization के time पे ये disclosure reporting आया था, which is now no longer relevant and therefore has been deleted from the schedule 3.
Sir, can I ask one question, please?
Yes, please.
What just you said about the last para, that borrowings is correctly used. If there is any cash credit limit and the SSE has purchased any fixed asset from that cash credit limit, so as auditor we need to specify this.
Yeah. So
witness एक ही है, witness एक और करा दे, तब तो ठीक है. witness से दूजन तीनों सौ कर दिए.
Anshul, can you mute all? I'll unmute myself.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Please go
thanks.
ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So see, yes. So if you look at it, even in CARO, there is a reporting whether short-term funds have been used for long-term purposes or not, as well as the requirement under CARO is whether term loans have been used for the specified purpose. So in CARO, there are two specific requirements. When it comes to your cash credit, or when it comes to schedule 3, because they are used for the business purpose, for the short-term purpose. So now I would suggest that you will have to go through the sanction terms and the sanction letter, whether so. See, if cash credit is permitted to use for the, see, many times I've seen cash credit where there are no limitations, but they say that they have to be used for the business purposes or for activities of business. There is no limitation or no restriction on that the company or the borrower cannot fund fixed assets from the cash credit. I have seen such sanction letters also. In that case, again, the assets that have been purchased, if they are for business purpose, business assets, then you can safely say that they are used for the purposes, specific purpose for which it was taken. But if there are specific limitations, then you will have to mention, because on a cash credit, because these are all fungible money, you cannot do a one-to-one. You will have to prepare an overall cash flow for the year, and you will have to assess that whether short-term funds or cash credits have been used for the fixed assets, which the sanction terms does not permit, and therefore that will have to be reported. Right? So moving on.
Sir, sorry to interrupt. I also have a query. Like the loans were raised in earlier years, and no new loan has been raised during the current year, financial year, say suppose 21-22. So in that scenario, can you please share what would be the disclosure requirements?
So again, I'll split into two parts. One is that with respect to term loan. So term loan, if they have already been used in the last year for the specified purpose and no further loans have been taken during the year, then that reporting would no longer come, because term loan is a one-time sanction that is there and it has already been utilized for the purpose. Therefore, no reporting would come in the subsequent balance sheet date. As far as cash credits and such borrowings are concerned, they are renewed every year. And therefore, I would consider that as a fresh sanction every year. And then every year, I would have to evaluate that whether they have been borrowed for the specific purpose or not. So again, depending on the type of borrowing and the terms and conditions attached to it, the reporting would be accordingly done.
Thank you, sir, for the clarification.
Yeah. So the third point on the slide, which you see, friends, I'll just explain broadly. What it means is that this is an assurance given by the board of directors of the company, where they say that the assets other than the non-current assets. So non-current assets would mean your working capital, that is your inventories, your trade receivables, your loans and advances, cash and bank balances, fixed deposits, all these amounts. So by this statement, the management or the board says that they will have a realization of the values that are being carried in the financial statements in the balance sheet, right? That is what is the sum and substance. So if we read it, what it says is, if in the opinion of the board, any of the assets other than PP, intangible and non-current do not have a value in the ordinary course of business, at least equal to the amount at which they are stated, right? Then, which means that they will be able to realize that value, utna minimum to aayega hi aayega. Which means that whatever are the provisions, the impairment losses and all that are required to be done by the management, they have adequately done that with respect to the current assets. Therefore, my request, friends, over here would be, if such a reporting is not being included in Schedule 3, please include it immediately, because this is where the responsibility is being cast on the board, where they are confirming कि भाई इतना पैसा जो balance sheet में दिखा है current assets का, मतलब other than the non-current assets, उतना तो realize होगा ही होगा. It is a board that is giving the confirmation. Please include it. If you are already including it, then just ensure by way of this amendment, they have added the word intangible assets. मतलब अभी तक property, plant, equipment and other non-current investments ही था सिर्फ, अभी intangible assets add कर दिया, तो उसको आप intangible assets add कर दीजिए. So if you are not giving, start giving it. If you are giving it, just ensure that you have included intangible assets also to that list.
So what may be the logic behind the introduction of the term intangible assets over here, sir?
Intangible, ultimately intangible is also non-current. So they want to exclude, what they want to say is that everything that is non-current. So you have to say the property, plant, equipment, intangible, non-current investments. ये सारे को छोड़ के बाकी जितने भी assets है, they have a value of realization at least equal to the amount at which they are stated in the financial statements. So that is why they have now included, or I would say improvised by including intangible assets.
Well, do not have realization one is also. Do not have the realization of value.
Yeah,
Can
so
I help
do
you,
not,
sir?
sorry?
Yeah. You say do not have a value at least equal to the amount of this. Do not have value means that what? It is not equal to, or it should do have the value.
At least that much.
So do not have, it should have the value on realization at least equal to the amount it should have. The language, it just says do not have the value means it is not equivalent to that meaning it comes. It should say it should do have a value on realization of the business at least equal to the amount.
I agree on the English language, but this is what is there. So we'll just have a look at it. But what the meaning is that they will be able to realize that much.
But they do not have that's why I feel it is not correct in my opinion.
Sure.
I think it is correctly. I think if you read carefully, it is correctly stating it. There's nothing wrong in the language, sir. Yeah, please go through it slowly.
Anyways, I'll share this presentation. You can have a look at whatever is there in the notification and you can reproduce that.
Okay. No,
yeah,
I
thank
have
you.
just
I agree on your observation, but that is what I just wanted to share the underlying. कि ये अपने को डिस्क्लोज करना चाहिए, अगर नहीं कर रहे हैं तो वी शुड इंक्लूड व्हाट इज द मीनिंग ऑफ दैट, एंड दैट इज एक्चुअली फॉर आवर बेनिफिट टू डिस्क्लोज दिस.
Sir, and is this disclosure only applicable for Division 1 financial statements?
It is there. So this change is there in the Division 1 intangible. So Division 2 and 3, there is no change. Similar there is there in Division 2 and 3 also, but their intangible was already included, and therefore there is no change. So this presentation is typically wherever there are changes that have been highlighted.
Okay, sir. Okay.
So valuation done by whom? So when we talk of the Division 1, there is a revaluation that is required with respect to property, plant, equipment. Required matlab wherever there is a revaluation that is possible, permissible. It might be an upward revaluation or a downward revaluation. Whether it has been done by a registered valuer as defined under the registered valuer's rules. That is what has to be disclosed. And when it comes to Division 2, there are three instances where a revaluation report or a report of a valuer would be required with respect to property, plant, equipment, with respect to intangible assets, and with respect to fair valuation of the investment property, where it has to be given by way of notes. So in that case also, the management has to give by way of the notes the disclosure whether the valuation has been done by a registered valuer as per the valuation rules or not. Title of immovable properties. So wherever there is land and or building in the financial statements, be it under property, plant, equipment, be it under investment property, be it under non-current assets held for sale or anywhere else, whether the title deeds are in the name of the company or not. With respect to lease property, the exemption has been given where the agreement, the lease agreement has been executed in favor of the lessee, then there is no reporting required under this. But in other cases, if the lease agreement is not executed in favor of the lessee, then that also, so maybe under Division 1, that would not appear on the face of the balance sheet. Like we discussed, for lease, you would have a ROU asset in case of Ind AS, but in non-Ind AS, because though it would not be there on the balance sheet, still in case of lease properties, if the lease agreement is not executed, that would still be reported. So what is to be reported? The gross carrying value, the title deeds किसके नाम पे है, प्रॉपर्टी अभी किसके नाम पे है, वो जो टाइटल डीड होल्डर है क्या वो प्रमोटर, डायरेक्टर या उसका रिलेटिव है या एम्प्लॉई है, कब से प्रॉपर्टी उनके नाम पे है और उनके नाम पे क्यों नहीं है, कंपनी के नाम पे प्रॉपर्टी क्यों नहीं है, and if there is a dispute, then that also needs to be disclosed. So this is with respect to the title of immovable properties. Similar reporting is there under the CARO also. Loans or advances. The type of borrower, again, this is more of a related party sort of a thing, where it is a promoter, director, a key management personnel or related parties. So the disclosure required, friends, over here is with respect to the amount of loan or advance, which is in the nature of loan. And the percentage to the total advances or advance in the nature of loan has to be given. Now the guidance note, it says that, this is where you have to bring in the auditor's judgment. What is advance in the nature of loan? I'll just give a simple example. So what the guidance note says, advance in the nature of loan, it can be with respect to the amount, it can be with respect to the timing also. So I'll give an example. Let us say that there is this company which is into a manufacturing or whatever business activities it is doing, and it has then entered into a contract with a related party. Let us say it's a partnership firm or a LLP or some proprietorship of the relative of the director or the promoter, where they are giving for job work or they are purchasing material from them and then manufacturing it or repacking it, whatever, and then this company is selling. So it is a related party transaction. Now let us say hypothetically that in the last year or in the current year also, they have entered into a contract for this job work or for supply of materials of to the extent of, let us say, 15 crores for the full year. Now in the month of April or May, they have given an advance of, let us say, 8 crores. So now as an auditor, we will have to judge that whether this advance is actually an advance or it is an advance which is in the nature of a loan. So what it would mean typically is that whether at arm's length, अगर ये transaction किया होता तो 15 करोड़ का पूरे साल का contract है, तो क्या 8 करोड़ अप्रैल या मई में दे देते with respect to the amount? If yes, if that is the nature, then it's fine. Then it would remain as an advance. If it is no, that means that it is in the nature of loan that that advance has been given. The second can be with respect to the timing. Like I said कि ये full year का contract है 15 करोड़ का और अप्रैल और मई में ही upfront 8 करोड़ दे दिया. So whether that is apt या फिर उसको लोन ही दिया है और एडवांस दिखाया है and subsequent invoices में ये adjust हो जाएगा जो Jan, Feb मतलब after 10 months, 11 months भी invoices raise होंगे but अभी से पैसा काफी कुछ दे दिया है. So on these facts and circumstances, judgment has to be based and you'll have to report whether they are loans. अगर loan है तो ठीक है, तब तो clear cut आपका आ जाएगा. But if there are advances given, which are in the nature of loans actually, then that also has to be reported. Another important aspect is that the nature of relationship, मतलब promoter, director, KMP, related parties has to be given, checked or existing as on the date of the loan or the advance that has been given. So if a director has taken a loan, let us say in the month of December, and in February that person has resigned as a director, as on 31st of March, he or she is no longer a director. That does not mean that this amount which is outstanding is not to be reported, because on the date of given the loan, that person was a director, and as therefore as at 31st March, if there is any amount which is outstanding, it would still be required to be disclosed under this particular clause. CWIP aging with respect to capital work in progress. So here also the buckets are given: less than 1 year, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, more than 3. And this is the historical amount that is outstanding as on the balance sheet date with respect to under the CWIP, capital work in progress, which typically is for the tangible assets. So here you don't have to give a asset wise or a project wise details with respect to the aging. You have to categorize or summarize into two. One is projects in progress and projects temporarily suspended. Again, the status as at the balance sheet date has to be seen. So let us say hypothetically that there was some project, which as at 31st of March, it was temporarily suspended, which subsequent to March, but before the sign off, is now under progress. But as on 31st March, you will have to evaluate that it is temporarily suspended and show that under temporarily suspended. If the management or the board wants, they may add an additional paragraph about a post balance sheet event, that this is post balance sheet, this has been considered as or it has started moving. The project has again commenced and it is no longer under suspension. But since as at balance sheet date it was suspended, it will be reported as suspended. So this is with respect to the CWIP aging. CWIP completion schedule. So this is as at 31st March, whatever are the projects which are outstanding, where there are time overruns or cost overruns. For both the situations, this table has to be given, and in this table, it is to be given project-wise. Right. So for each project, the larger projects, the guidance note says that if you have a number of small projects, you can just club them together and show that if there are a number of small projects that are there. Otherwise, you'll have to give a project-wise details about when they would be completed. Since there are two requirements, one is projects where there are time overruns, projects where there are cost overruns. The guidance note suggests that you should have two tables, one for time overrun and one is for the cost overrun. And you have to determine that whether the extension, let us say hypothetically that there is some project which is to be completed on 1st of March, but has not yet been completed. And then the management has said that now this will get completed on 30th September 22. Then you have to see that actually what were the situation and circumstances for the delay, whether that extension is the extension or a revision of the original due date or it is a subsequent event कि भाई ये complete नहीं हुआ है इसलिए हम लोग इसको extend कर रहे हैं. If it is for the original, from the original due date, that extension has been given, matlab with retrospective effect they have, because of the circumstances and all, let us say COVID, for which 5 months the factory and everything remain closed or such things would have happened for the extension, then they may not be reported, but otherwise all the reporting would come with respect to the time overruns as well as the cost overruns. Similar reporting is required for the intangible assets under development. So whatever we had for CWIP, the tangible assets, the completion schedule, as well as the aging, the same thing is required for the intangible assets under development also. The next disclosure, friends, is with respect to the Benami property. So this is with respect to those transactions or companies where the proceedings under the Benami Properties, Benami Transaction Prohibition Act have been initiated or are pending. Only in those cases. So we don't have to go and investigate कि कोई Benami property है या नहीं. That is not expected or required. If there are proceedings pending, then only all these disclosures are required. I'll not go through that. I'll like I said, I'll share this presentation and you can just go through whatever are the disclosure requirements. Borrowings on the basis of the security of current assets. So typically, if we look at it, this would not be, in my opinion, term loans, because term loans normally are secured under the fixed assets, the tangible assets. These would be the borrowings like where you have the inventories, the trade receivables on the basis which has been provided as a security and borrowings taken. So, the cash credits, the overdrafts, and all those would typically come under this reporting. So this disclosure is to be made if there are borrowings at any point of time in the year, not necessary कि year end में balance होना चाहिए. साल में कभी भी लिया है borrowing, तो उसको ये reporting करना पड़ेगा. The reporting is required with respect to the quarterly returns or statements filed with the lender and whether they match with the books or account or not, whether they are in agreement with the books or not. So if there are monthly statements or monthly returns which are being filed, then also you have to take cognizance of only the quarterly statement or the quarterly returns that are being filed. Friends, the guidance note says two things. One is that those statements that are being filed or that have been filed, they are not required to be audited. That is not what is the requirement of the clause, that we audit those statements which have been filed. Second thing is that we do not have to compare those statements with the audited books of account. What I mean to say, like recently I had in my office one case, just yesterday we were discussing, where as on 31st March, once pursuant to the audit that we started, under the cut-off procedures, there were certain sales transactions which had to be reversed. So as on 31st of March, originally they had recognized certain sales, which under the accounting standard was not eligible to be recognized as sales and had to be reversed. And therefore, sales and trade receivables both had to be reversed because of the audit query, and that inventory was shown as a finished goods in transit. So the trade receivables reduced ho gaya because of the audited financial statements now. So the guidance note says that the books of account need not be audited. So you will have to take the trial balance basis of which the statements have been filed with the bankers or the lenders, and you have to see whether they match with that. In one of the presentations that I made, there was a query where a member said that many times, just to increase the DP, the drawing power or the drawing limit, the companies or the clients, they give the market value of the inventories and not the cost. So in such case, I believe that there should be a reconciliation and a deviation, and the reason for the discrepancy, it has to be reported by the management under the Schedule 3 disclosure. So for trade receivables as well as for the inventories, also, if there is a manual books of account or manual stock register that is being maintained, I believe that would still be books of account. And again, my assumption is that if that client is subject to tax audit, where we are mentioning books of account, in such a case, the books of account, we would mention the stock register, the inventory register. Maybe in the mode, we might not say electronic mode, but we might say manual mode. I don't know, but in one case, I was told that Vishal bhai, kabhi wo client ka inventory records hi nahi hota hai. If you ask me, I do not accept that. Because as an auditor, then how are you certifying the inventory, the quantitative details and all, when you are saying true and fair view in the absence of inventory records, how do you certify that? Therefore, if you ask me, that is something which is not acceptable. So this is one area where I believe that the auditors would have to focus on and maybe even build up systems going forward where the clients submit the quarterly returns or the statement files. I believe that as auditors, we must always rely on an acknowledged copy of the bank that this is the statement that the client has submitted to the bank, and then we should match that with the books, whether they are in agreement or not, and then report thereon. There is a similar reporting under CARO also, but under CARO we'll come to that, but there is a threshold of 5 crore of rupees. So where there is a sanction amount of 5 crore rupees, then only this reporting is required. But in case of Schedule 3, there is no such threshold. Whatever be the amount, the reporting is required. Willful defaulter, where the company is declared willful defaulter, I don't think that would be in
Sir,
any
one
of
small
the client's
question.
case. Yes.
Sir, just now you said about the quarterly statement. If suppose there are no quarterly statements filed, then what to do? And there are only 12 monthly statements filed.
So you have to see the statement as at the quarter end. So see,
Okay.
what I assume is there would be one statement for April, May, June, each month that is being filed as at. See, typically these are all as at.
We need to total that and then compare.
No, see, these are all security of current assets, right? So assets would always be as at. They would not be
Right.
for the year. So let us say trade receivables, then as at a particular date, you would typically give the 90 days wala normal jo rehta hai credit terms, which I have seen. के 90 days के नीचे वाले जो outstanding रहते हैं trade receivables वो देते हैं. So that is always as at. Then you have to consider as at 30th June, 30th September, 31st December, and 31st March. You have to ignore the rest of the months.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Sir, I also have a couple of queries.
Yes.
My first query is stock statement includes the details of debtors, creditors, and the aging, and also details with respect to advance to suppliers, advance from customers, and also we are only the management is only concerned about the disclosures with respect to inventories or entire elements being reported to the banks.
So security of current assets, whatever is the security. So let us say with respect to inventories, right? It is what is to be financed is the unpaid stock, like you rightly mentioned, Anshu. So you would have inventories, you would have trade payables against those inventories, which would get knocked off, and then you would have an unpaid stock on which the drawing power or the drawing limits would be assessed by the lender based on the margins and all. So it's not just the inventory, it would also be the trade payables, that whether that is, let us say that it is on the unpaid inventory or unpaid stock जो बोलते हैं उस पे हम लोग banks funding करती हैं, and the client has given the inventories, they have not deducted the trade payables against that. Then to that extent, I would say that is still not in agreement with the books, because the terms require that he had to submit the unpaid stock only. Okay. So you have to see the security. Security में क्या क्या है? Trade, see, normally loans and advances नहीं रहते हैं security में. This is what I understand. So if it is with respect to trade receivables and unpaid stock, then that is what has to be verified, whether that matches, that are in agreement with the books or not. Okay.
And sir, we have been facing practical difficulty across the listed entities. Like, say, suppose to give an example, the stock statements are to be submitted within 15 days from the end of the quarter. Say, suppose 15th of July for the quarter ended 30th June. But the results get published maybe in the first week of August or second week of August, and there are some many index adjustments or management adjustments being done at the time of limited review. So in that case, there would not be any question of tallying, and there would not be agreement. So how do auditors and how do management deal with such scenarios? Like, they are the genuine circumstances.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, that see, if there is a due date, like you mentioned that they have to submit by the 7th of a month, and they submit by 7th of a month. So what should the management, as an auditor, I would say the documentation should be that we should take out the trial balance, or we should have a copy of the trial balance as on the date that they have filed those returns or their statements. If it matches with that, and therefore I said that we did not do the audit of the statement, and the books also may not be audited, I would say. Right. So if it matches with that, then to the extent they are in agreement with the books. So उस दिन का trial balance आपको निकलवा के check करवाना पड़ेगा.
Sir, but trial balance generated on 7th July and on 14th of August would be different for the particular that 30th of June also. So in that case, Like we advised our clients, we recommended our clients to file revised stock statements, but bankers are making objections. They say that once you file the revised statements, your drawing power also gets changed. So we can't accept any revised statements. But those changes are only on account of index adjustment. So how do we
Correct.
report
So
in the
what
financial statements?
no, see, what I understand that if those are, so what the client can do is that, let us say, when you have signed the limited review results or the report, whatever is the trial balance, there would be specific entries dated 30th of June that would have been passed in a few ledgers of your receivables, payables, inventory, whatever. So that becomes, so that is what is the part of the reconciliation that it mentions. So if you have certain numbers which have been given to the bankers, so you have a X number, you have a Y number, which is as per the final trial balance. And between X and Y, whatever are the entries you are able to identify, because as an auditor, you would have made those entries or you would have gone through those entries, that can be part of the reconciliation. So till now, so up to March 22, what I believe would be required would be something like a rollback procedures. That we have a trial balance, we would roll back to find out what are the reconciliations and arrive at the numbers or the trial balance when the statement was submitted to the bank. Going forward, that is where I said that we in the whole deliberation that there would be at many places where you would want certain systems and processes to get inbuilt with respect to the client and the way they maintain their books of account. So going forward, maybe you can tell them now that whenever you submit, you take a printout of the trial balance and keep it on record, keep it signed and on record, and or attach it with the stock statement for the auditor's copy to report thereon. So this is what I believe as on the, at least for the first year, the solution would be. See, because such difficulties we would always face in the trade payables, trade receivables, aging schedules, because all these things we are now doing in the hindsight. But on the basis of our experience, friends, this is what I would also recommend, that whatever is your experience, client specific, you will have to do a lot of homework. You'll have to educate a lot of client, and that is where at the inception also to Nitesh Bhai and the study circle, I requested to have a meeting of the clients also, that there are a lot of systems and processes you will now have to ensure that you are able to put up or set up at the client's place.
Sir, I would request you to please enlighten us with the audit trail being mandated by the Companies Act also at the end of the session. I think that is also correlated with this.
वो तो कोरिलेटेड है, पहले इतना तो करें. मेरे को आज सबको ज्यादा डराना नहीं है. मैं आई नो 80% तो मैं डरा दूंगा, बाकी 20% बचा के रखूंगा नेक्स्ट ईयर के लिए. आई फील दैट वी आर ऑल फॉर्चुनेट कि ऑडिट ट्रेल एक साल पोस्टपोन हुआ है. एटलीस्ट अदरवाइज दैट आल्सो इज अ ग्रेट चैलेंजिंग रिपोर्टिंग दैट वुड कम अप. So friends, willful defaulter, you can go through this. अगर कोई, I don't think कोई के client होंगे, but होंगे तो आपको ये सब disclose करना है. Relationship with stock of companies, again, extremely difficult area to implement. और जैसे मैंने बोला कि client के वहाँ पे system set करनी पड़ेगी. This is another example of that. So friends, what is to be reported? अगर कोई भी company client है, मतलब हमारे client है, उनके customer, vendor, investor, investee कंपनी है. So whether they are stock of companies or not, और उसके साथ transactions हुए हैं या closing balance है, तो उसका disclosure करना है. So it might be with respect to sale, it might be with respect to purchase, it might be with respect to service rendered, it might be with respect to service received, it might be कि उनके shares में आपके client ने invest किया हो और आपके client के shares में company or investors, तो ये सारे का स्टॉक ऑफ कंपनी है या नहीं, उसके साथ रिलेशनशिप क्या है, बैलेंस क्या है, उसका डिस्क्लोजर अपने को करना है. दैट इज व्हाट इज द रिक्वायरमेंट. सो द फर्स्ट एसओपी, if you ask me, is to identify the list of company clients that your client has on the vendor side, on the customer side, everywhere. उसका CIN ढूंढना पड़ेगा. ये तो एक बेसिक रिक्वायरमेंट है जो क्लाइंट्स को रेडी करके देनी पड़ेगी. Now, how to get this information? If you ask me, I can just give you whatever is the practice that is being followed. One, there are companies which are providing such services कि जहाँ पे definitely on a payment basis, जहाँ पे मतलब your client will give the whole list of the CIN to them. They are maintaining the whole database of stock of companies. They will give the report that out of these, आपने समझिए 150-200 CIN दिए हैं, तो उसमें से कितने स्टॉक ऑफ कंपनीज है वो आपको प्लॉट करके वो आपको रिपोर्ट दे देंगे. दैट इज अ थर्ड पार्टी रिपोर्ट ऑन अ पेमेंट थिंग. दैट इज वन. सेकेंड, द क्लाइंट कैन पूरा CIN जो लिस्ट है वो खुद अपने ऑफिस में, आई वुड रिक्वेस्ट, ये सर्विसेज हमको फ्री में नहीं प्रोवाइड करनी चाहिए, दैट इज माई डेफिनेटली अ रिक्वेस्ट। वो क्लाइंट अपने ऑफिस में किसी को बिठा के हर एक MCA की साइट में जाके वो CIN डाले और चेक कर ले कि भाई ये एक्टिव कंपनी है या स्टॉक ऑफ कंपनी है। दैट इज द सेकेंड मेथड। द थर्ड जो गाइडेंस नोट में दिया है STK7. So STK7, when I went through, it is typically a form that is filed by each ROC with the MCA, giving a list of the companies that they have, that ROC has struck off during a particular period, monthly हो या जो भी हो, और उसका वो PDF रहता है जो all the ROCs they file at their different points in time as per the requirement. So in fact, मैं जो सर्विस प्रोवाइडर्स की बात कर रहा था, ये सब STK7 और सब करके ही उनके पास वो डेटाबेस पूरा बिल्ड होता है कि which are the list of the stock of companies. But yes, the reporting is there, which is required for the current year as well as for the previous year. जिससे भी transactions हुए stock of companies के साथ, वो सारे के सारे disclosure करने हैं with the name of the stock of company. So this is with respect to the stock of company. Other disclosures, charges satisfaction yet to be registered with the ROC. मतलब creation of charge या satisfaction of charge beyond statutory period अगर अभी भी pending है तो उसका disclosure करना है. Second is the Companies Act under 287, it prescribes that 2 layers of companies are allowed. So in case there are more than 2 layers of companies below the holding company, मतलब नीचे, then that will be required to be reported. Analytical ratios. So there are 11 ratios. When I talk of Division 1 and Division 2, that is there because Division 3 is for the NBFCs, and also for the NBFCs under Division 1, there are 4 ratios. So we'll focus on the 11 ratios that are there. So here just a couple of things. The ratios जो है वो Annexure B to the guidance note. Each of the guidance note के Annexure B में ratio क्या दिया है, क्या working करना चाहिए. Second is they are all model formulas. They company wise, industry wise, there are certain elements which might be included, which might be excluded with respect to the ratio. मतलब numerator denominator में certain elements you might, based on the industry practice, based on the company practice, there can be a variation that might be there. Another requirement is that on a year-on-year basis, current year or previous year में 25% से ज़्यादा का variation हो, plus or minus, तो उसके reasons भी company को provide करना है why there is a variance of 25% plus or minus. One more thing, friends, I would like to share, may not be relevant for March 22, but definitely going forward, that let us say March 22 में आपने ratio में element लिए है, कुछ numerator में, denominator में, comparative 21 में भी आपने same लिए, you have provided ratio for both the years, 25% variance, fine. Going forward, let us say after a couple of years you feel, based on the industry practice, yeah, based on your discussion with other professionals, that there is a need to modify some element on or the basis on which the ratios are being worked out. Then you will make a change. Let us say March 25 में आप कुछ change करते हैं ratio में, some element of the numerator or denominator in one of the ratios. तो तब previous period का भी, let us say March 24, when we talk of March 25, March 24 का भी आपको वो ratio का change करके you will have to provide for that, and then you will determine the 25% variation, because you have to compare an apple with an apple when you are doing that 25% variance. I hope everybody would appreciate, and therefore in such year for March 24 also you will need to make that change. Yes sir, you have raised your hand, you can ask your question, Mr. Sarga. Anybody wants to ask a question?
Better we will take questions after finishing the presentation, sir.
Okay, sir. Sure. So the next is with respect to merger and amalgamations, that where this disclosure is required, that whether as per the scheme, it is in accordance with the accounting standards or not. That is what is the disclosure required. Nowadays, the NCLT asks for the certificate from the auditor that whether the proposed scheme is in accordance with the accounting or the proposed accounting treatment in the proposed scheme is as per the accounting standards or not. So normally this deviation would not come, but otherwise in case there are any deviations, then that has to be reported. So utilization of funds. So बहुत सारा text है on the screen. I'll first explain in principle what it is, and then you can report if it is required. So this is typically where money come into your client or they go out from your client where the ultimate beneficiary is somebody else and it is using a round tripping or a camouflage or a roundabout way to reach the ultimate beneficiary. So let us say your client has received money. There is a company A from which the client was supposed to receive money, but for whatever reason, company A gives to a company or an entity B gives to your client. So company A has given to B with the notion or with the instructions or with the intention that it has to come to your client. So it is a roundabout route in which it has come. So this needs to be reported. Second is also on the reverse, that if your client, your company client has given any money, let us say where the ultimate beneficiary is a third party, such transactions need to be reported. So international ho ya domestic ho, ऐसा कोई भी transactions हो, इसको report करना है. So it's not just domestic, even international also. Like a company in India has invested into a subsidiary in a foreign country, which has again invested into a subsidiary in a foreign country, in some other country. Then such transactions, they are required to be reported because there is a requirement also under the whether the provisions of FEMA and PMLA have not been violated. So sum and substance, this is it. And over here, I would just like to add that even in the main audit report, not CARO, the main audit report, Rule 11E has been included wherein reporting is required. So even if it is not applicable in Schedule 3, as far as your Rule 11E in the main audit report is required, still this reporting is required there. On the statement of P&L, there are two changes. One is total revenue की जगह पे total income आ गया है face पे. Second is in respect of Section 8 companies, there is a clause BA under the operating income, operating revenues that has been included with respect to grants or donations received. Undisclosed income. So this is a disclosure which is required where the company has surrendered or disclosed any income under the Income Tax Act, right? So let us say, so this is first condition is that where income that was not recorded in the books has been surrendered or disclosed voluntarily by the company or your client, unless there is any immunity. So that is the requirement. So, normal additions that happen on the GP ratio and personal capital expenditure or capital revenue capital or personal expenditure being disallowed, all those would not form part of this. It's only where there has been an undisclosed income, which was previously unrecorded, and now it is being surrendered voluntarily by the client. Then in that case, this disclosure would come. And this would, so even in case of survey, search, tax assessments, in any of these situations, if there is a voluntary disclosure that has been made, then that would come. And if that amount is unrecorded, then how it has been recorded, and that has to be disclosed. If सर्वे या सर्च में कोई स्टेटमेंट दिया है बाद में रिट्रैक्ट कर दिया है, then this disclosure would not come because that has been retracted. So this is with respect to undisclosed income. CSR. So I'll not go into greater detail. We already have a guidance note on CSR where certain disclosures are required. So these are some additional disclosures that are there. There are two more disclosures under CARO also which are there. So these are typical disclosures which I would request that you can go through and comply with. Cryptocurrency, virtual currency. So this is additional disclosure required. So it was already there in 2021 with respect to cryptocurrency, virtual currency. The amount of currency held on the reporting date, the profit loss, अगर कोई deposit वो trader या broker जिसके through trade कर रहे हैं cryptocurrency virtual उधर को deposit दिया है तो उसका disclosure कितना दिया है किसको, where it is reflected. All these disclosures are there for the cryptocurrency and virtual currency. So friends, that was it with respect to Schedule 3. I think it would be not very difficult for everybody to implement. Everybody would agree to that. And so friends, like I said earlier, it's time that we realize and we start working on it because there is a lot of work to do. And especially when it comes to 2 years of compilation of data and audit of data. And also, I would say setting up systems and processes for the clients that going forward, this reporting, which is now of a permanent nature, that it becomes easy to comply with for the client as well as for us. For CARO, what I will do, I'll quickly run through because like I said, in most of the cases, there is an overlap between Schedule 3 and CARO. And wherever there is just some change, that is the area that I would just like to, I will highlight. And like I said, I'll share this presentation. So it becomes easy for you as a referencing also. So The only thing over here, the rest I've already discussed, is that the Institute's guidance note on CARO 2020 is already available. It is there in public domain. So I would request you, just like you do for Schedule 3, Division 1 to Division 2 and Division 3, please for CARO also download the guidance note of the Institute. And one more thing which I would say, that the CARO guidance note, there are specific paragraphs with respect to the audit procedures under each of the clause. So in case of your client, even if CARO is not applicable, but there are a lot of provisions, like I said, where there is overlap between Schedule 3 and CARO. So Schedule 3 में applicability जहाँ पे होता है, तो my request would be please go through CARO also, कि वहाँ पे जो audit procedures और reporting का दिया है, at least that will help you when you are doing the Schedule 3 verification also. So friends, I will quickly run through. Fixed assets has been replaced by property, plant and equipment. The second thing is about intangible assets. So अभी तक we were supposed to maintain records for the tangible assets, जो हम लोग fixed assets register बोलते थे. Now that has to be maintained for the intangible assets also. And then as an auditor, we have to report whether the company is maintaining proper records showing the particulars of the intangible assets. This is with respect to title deeds of immovable property not held in the name of company. We discussed that under Schedule 3. So I'll not repeat that. Only is with respect to where the revaluation has been done. Then in that case, whether it is done by a registered valuer as per the valuation rules. 1E with respect to Benami transactions. So these two we discussed under the Schedule 3. Under physical verification, friends, earlier we had material discrepancies, which has now been substituted by a threshold of 10%. So any and it says for each class of inventories, mean for raw material, packing material, let us say stores and spares, WIP, FG, under each class of inventories, if the variance is 10% or more, then we have to report whether they have been properly dealt with in the books of account or not. Under 2B, what is there is 5 crores. We said about the loans being borrowed on the security of current assets, trade receivables, inventories, and that. So here the threshold is of 5 crores of the sanction amount. There is no such threshold in Schedule 3. With respect to loans and advances given, earlier the requirement was reporting with respect to related parties. So, parties covered in the register maintained under Section 189 of the Companies Act, that has now been removed. So all types of transactions, all the parties would be required to be, जिसको भी loan दिया है, सारे reporting में आएंगे. So the first category is a bifurcation between loans and advances and guarantees or securities given to subsidiaries, joint ventures, associates, and other than subsidiaries, joint ventures, and associates, whether the investments made, guarantees provided, security, and grant are not prejudicial to the company's interest. So earlier the requirement was for loans only. Now it is for investment, guarantees, security, and advances in the nature of loans. For everything we have to report or opine whether they are prejudicial to the company's interest or not. Schedule of repayment, overdue amount, that are almost similar. CE is what we say typically is the evergreening of loans. So let us say the company has given loan to somebody which is due, let us say in financial year 21-22. Now that party is not able to repay the loan, and for which then the company, either it renews the loan or it extends the loan, or it gives a fresh loan for the repayment of the earlier loan. Evergreening, वो मतलब green ही रखने का उसको. If there are any such transactions, then they have to be reported under 3E. 3F, again, it details that for the aggregate amount and percentage of the loans to promoters, related parties, that has to be disclosed. Under 7, Clause 7, so in between there are no changes. Then coming to Clause 7, goods and services tax has been added. And 7B, the reference to all the laws under 7A has been given. So that is the change under Clause 7. Clause 8 is reporting of undisclosed income, which we discussed under Schedule 3. Now Clause 9 about borrowings. So earlier we had to report on borrowings from financial institution, bank, government, or debenture holder. Now that has been removed. So any borrowings that has to be reported, and if there are defaults, then we have to give the details as has been specified. Willful defaulter we discussed under Schedule 3. 9C talks about term loans, whether they were applied for the purpose for which the loan were obtained, and if not, then you give the details of the diversion and the purpose for which it is used. 9D, short-term funds for long-term purposes. This was there in CARO 2003. It was removed in 2015-16 CARO, but now it has been reinstated in CARO 2020. So short-term funds used for long-term purposes. I would share that this can be, again, a two-way reporting. One is as at the balance sheet date with respect to the short-term, long-term, and second can be with respect to the cash flows during the year also, that whether short-term has been used for long-term purpose or not. 9E is that whether the company has taken any loan to meet the obligation of any of its subsidiary, associate or joint venture. मतलब उनके कोई obligation थे payment के with respect to loan, liabilities, whatever might be, for which the holding company has borrowed money to settle their obligations. Then that has to be reported under 9E. 9F, here the reporting is required where the loan, the company has raised loan by pledging the shares or securities of the सब्सिडरी जॉइंट वेंचर और एसोसिएट, अगर उनके सिक्योरिटीज को प्लेज करके कंपनी ने लोन लिया है तो उसका रिपोर्टिंग 9F में आएगा. Under 10, these are some minor changes during the year clarify किया है. Term loans, if you see in the left side of the screen, term loans को हटा दिया because term loans का now there is a specific provision that is there under CARO. Earlier we saw, so here this is with respect to IPO and FPO under 10A, and 10B is with respect to the debentures or any preferential allotment. उसके लिए 10B का reporting. Under 11A, fraud. If you see, there has been a very extensive reporting now required, very onerous responsibilities cast on the auditor. Earlier, it was that fraud on the company by its officers or employees. Now that officers or employees has been removed, which means fraud on the company by anybody, any third party, including officers or employees, anybody has done any fraud on the company, that has to be reported under 11A now. 11B, whether you have, as the auditor has filed the ADT 4 under one as required under 143(12) of the Companies Act, whether that has been filed or not. And the last clause is about the whistleblower complaint, if any received by the year, then as an auditor, whether you have considered that or not. This is a clause which is removed now with respect to the managerial remuneration from CARO. With respect to Nidhi company, whether there is any default in payment of interest or deposits, this clause has been added, which was not there earlier. Internal audit, whether there is an internal audit system commensurate with the size and nature of its business. This was there under CARO 2003, which was removed in 15-16, and now it has been reinstated. Now, in addition to that, there is one more clause which has been added, whether the reports of the internal auditors for the period under audit were considered by the statutory auditor or not. So you'll have to take the internal audit reports, put them in your record, audit documentation, and also review, go through those reports, that in case there are any rectification or adjustments or observations of the internal auditor which has the impact or which you have to take cognizance of as a statutory auditor, then you have to see whether that has been rectified or corrected by the company or not, and otherwise you'll have to report on that. This is with respect to the NBFCs. So there is a reporting style now. This is with respect to core investment companies as defined under the RBI Act, then what is whether the company has satisfied that requirement or not. But 16B is important, that whether the company has conducted any NBFC activities without a valid certificate of registration from the RBI, then that has to be reported. The clause 16C and D are with respect to the CIC, core investment companies. Clause 17, these are new clauses now. So this was also there under CARO 2003, which was removed in 15-16 and now again reinstated, whether the company has incurred any cash losses during the year and in the immediately preceding financial year. And if yes, then what is the amount of the losses, that cash losses, that has to be disclosed. Auditors resignation, like I said, now all are new points. So whether there has been a resignation of an auditor, so now let us, as a statutory auditor, you are signing a financial statement which last year was signed by somebody else and that auditor has resigned. Then whether you have considered the issues, objections or concern that has been raised by the outgoing auditors, and therefore it becomes important that you communicate with the previous auditor. I know everybody would be doing that, but now CARO also requires that you communicate with the previous auditor and you are able to, you will have to report on this. This is something which is challenging. Again, I would say clause 19, where you have to give as an auditor, or you have to opine that the company will be able to meet its liabilities in the next 12 months that are falling due in the next 12 months, the company will be able to meet them. So you have to go through the financial ratios, the aging and the expected dates of the realization of financial assets, liabilities, payment, information from the financial statements, the auditor, your knowledge about the board, the management plan. You have to consider all these and then opine that there no material uncertainty exists on the date of the audit report. So not on the balance sheet date, but on the date of the audit report with respect to the liabilities that they fall due within a period of 1 year from the balance sheet date. Clause 20 on CSR, like I said, these are two additional reporting requirements about the amount unspent and the ongoing projects which you are required to report on. The last clause, clause 21, again, this is with respect to CFS, consolidated financial statements. So per se, you don't need to give a report, a separate CARO clause-wise on the consolidated financial statements. But what is required is that in the CFS, under the group, subsidiaries, associates, joint venture in any of the entity, if that auditor of that entity has made any adverse comment or qualified under the CARO, then to that extent you will have to give in the CFS with respect to the CARO reporting. So you don't have to have a full CARO of CFS consolidating all the entities, but only the adverse remarks or the qualifications. Friends, this is just an awareness initiative that I have started now since almost a year, where I prepare such small snippets on the audit and company law, and I share with everybody. But I do a broadcast on WhatsApp. You know that if you have saved this number and I have saved your number, then only it is possible for us to converse or for me to send across to you. So in case you are interested, please save this number, drop in a hi, giving your name and your details so that I am able to save your number on your database, into my database, and add and share this. So whatever I have shared till now, I have my website, vishaldochi.in. You can just go through that website. It has a lot of Excel templates, tools, formats, audit checklists, Excel tools, these, what I said, the snippets audit related, which can help you in your day-to-day practice. So friends, thanks once again for this opportunity. Thanks to the Views Exchange Study Circle, and thanks for all of you for gathering in such a large number. And I would be very happy to respond to the questions that you would have. Thanks once again, friends.
Thank you, Vishalji, for your limited over batting and scoring century. But this is the topic which is very exhaustive, and a lot of self studies required instead of deliberations. So any questions had been coming from the audience now and then. I don't think we have also touched the threshold of the last end time. So I would request the organizers to complete the ceremony of closing ceremony.
Sir, before we conclude and before we give a vote of thanks to our speaker, almost all the queries raised in the chat box have been duly addressed by the speaker himself or in the comment box, but we have received some queries over the email. The study circle has received some queries over the email. So I would like to read out a few, like with respect to calculation of cash losses for reporting in the CARO report, what would be the treatment of Ind AS adjustments?
The cash losses, I believe that when you are requiring cash flow, even under Ind AS 3, all the non-cash items are required to be eliminated. So similarly, yeah. So similarly, I would say with respect to cash losses, sorry. Yeah. Am I audible, Anshul?
Yes, sir, you are
Yeah,
loudly
fine,
audible. I would
sorry.
request our participants with folded hands not to please unmute until and unless required.
So whatever are the non-cash, because it specifically talks of the cash losses, and even when we prepare the cash flow statement, we consider only the cash items and the non-cash items. So I feel that the first document to opine on that or for that working would be the cash flow statement, and therefore any fair valuation adjustments, because typically they would all be in the case of a non-cash item, non-cash adjustment, that should be excluded when computing the cash losses.
Okay, sir. Okay. And sir, can you please throw some practical insights with respect to reporting of unfavorable remarks, negative remarks made in the CARO report of subsidiary or associate or joint venture company, basically component company, basically the remarks made by the component auditors.
See, if you ask me, the remarks of the component auditors, with respect to CARO, and this would happen more so if, like they have not done a fixed assets verification, or there are inventory verification which have not been practices, or which are not been proper or not been followed, or discrepancies in excess of 10% have not been adjusted. So if there are any such remarks of the component auditors, I would say that they would form part of the CFS clause 21 reporting. So I think you'll have to go through each CARO. So see, I would not say that the clause on, where you show the disputed, undisputed statutory liabilities. If you ask me, that is not a deviation, that is not an adverse remark, that is a statement of facts that CARO requires and is reported by the component auditor. So that should not typically come as an adverse remark or a deviation. More so it would be there where anything which is of an adverse nature, which is not of a routine thing, gets reported.
Okay, sir. Sir, and there are a lot of queries regarding, and there is the same query from many members, like whether reporting in the CARO, appropriate reporting in the CARO, can we get a protection from not giving a qualified opinion? Like, say, suppose if we mention it in the CARO and give a clean opinion in the audit report, would it work?
See, I believe if you look at the way the things are, CARO is, if you ask me how I look at it, again, my personal opinion, CARO is what is there from a corporate governance perspective, or the way the management or the board of directors have run a company during the year. If you look at the CARO clauses, कि भाई fixed assets verification किया है कि नहीं, register maintain किया है कि नहीं, inventory का proper process किया है या नहीं, even the new one, cash losses, if we see short-term funds used for long-term purposes, they are all the way the company has been managed during the year. So CARO per se would not invite a qualification in the audit report, because an adverse remark in CARO itself would stand out, because that itself is a part of the audit report. But if you feel as an auditor that there is a remark which has been given under CARO which has a substantial impact, or let us say, जैसे हमारा वो जो clause है where we, I think it's 19, where we are reporting that in the next 12 months, the company, whether it would be able to meet its short-term liabilities or not, right? Based on all the documentation and all. Now, if you ask me, if we say that the company is not going to meet its liabilities, then whether in the main audit report it impacts or triggers the material uncertainty with respect to going concern. This is how I would try to evaluate and try to map the CARO with the main audit report reporting.
Okay, thank you, sir. Sir, I also have some queries from myself. Like, if we see the clause number 3 of the CARO 2020, there are 6 clauses, 6 sub-clauses. Earlier, only the loans, advances, and securities guarantees given to the parties covered in section 189 was covered. Now, it seems that all the loans transactions, all the security transactions are covered in the CARO 2020. So sometimes maybe for such a company who are not an NBFC company but particularly predominantly engaged only in such type of activities, the report might be very exhaustive or might run into pages. The clause number 3 itself might feel to be a separate report. In that case, how would our institute guide our members, like what is to be done? Because clause number A asks certain questions. If we say it is yes, then we need to report over there in clause A. If we say no, then it needs to be reported under B. And if the answer to B is no, then it gets covered under C. And if same thing, the series goes on. So how would the institute guide
if you
our
ask
members? Yes.
I would just give a very simple answer. I know from an application point of view, it would not be simple, but the answer from my side would be simple, that the institute is not authorized to give any exemptions with respect to the reporting. The exemption, if any, has to come from the MCA by virtue of that amendment to a notification on CARO or any such thing. As far as the institute is concerned, it will go by what has been given, and if there is no exemption provided, institute will not prescribe of any exemption with respect to the reporting.
Correct, sir. So, but like any more specific guidance, because the guidance note we have from the institute, though it covers a lot of matters, but practically there are a lot of issues in the industry which the management, when we draft our report, CARO report, and present it before the management, there is always a tussle.
I like I said, see, ultimately whatever is to be reported has to be reported. Now, even if it runs into 10 pages, if that is what is the requirement, maybe what would happen there, since it is a first time implementation, even now there would be a representations from the industry side also, that they would also, when it comes to Schedule 3 and other aspects which the companies would now actually come out with their results and the reports and all, they would understand and find out that whatever are the difficulties, and maybe we can expect a representation from the industries as well as from the institute to actually come under the ease of doing business things, and request the MCA to dilute some of the aspects, or maybe club or clarify on some of the aspects which are required. But I think as far as March 22 is concerned, we'll have to go by whatever is there in CARO and the schedule.
Okay, sir. So we find in the public domain that you have also signed a couple of reports for listed entities and they have been published. So what is your personal opinion with respect to the amended Schedule 3 requirements and the CARO 2020 reporting requirements? Like whether they would be practically imposing various restrictions on the management and various restrictions on the auditors also, like NAFRA coming on top of our head, and SEBI, MCA regulating each and every aspect of our audit documentation.
Yeah, so that is where during the course of the presentation also I mentioned that for each and every aspect, the audit documentation would definitely be required to be kept. So you will have to question each and every element that is now required under Schedule 3, whatever was there. Not that it was not required earlier, but specifically with these changes, what would be required is that for each and every, I would say, a correct reporting or a straightforward reporting or a deviation or any such thing, we will have to have ample documentation to be done. And that is where I at the inception said that please start from tomorrow. Today you can have a good night's sleep. Pata nahi abhi sabko neend aayegi ya nahi aayegi, but still presuming that you start from tomorrow, at least download the guidance notes, start having more educative sessions. Maybe I would request the study circle also, Nitesh bhai is here, that please at least on a fortnightly basis, form smaller group. Practical challenges kya aa rahe hain, internally members can discuss it. It's only collectively that we will be able to come out of this compliance requirement. Koi individual nahi kar payega. So unless it's a group, and especially those in the group, if you have people who have already implemented for the listed companies, then they can handhold, they can guide the smaller entities or the small practitioners for implementing of this. It is definitely a great challenge. And therefore, I feel that we still have April, May, 2 mahine gaye. We still have, I would say, 3 months. I am counting only till August only. September to gini nahi raha hu, but we have still 3 months in which we can try to implement in the best possible manner and meet the government and other stakeholders' expectations.
Yes, sir. Though 2 hours time is very short time for deliberating on amended Schedule 3 and CARO 2020, but our Vishal sir has taken the privilege to come down to our city of joy, Kolkata. So he is on 27, 28, 29th, and he's speaking in 3 different forums and accountants circle and EIRC in our own institute EIRC, and he's also speaking on how to face CA examination. So we would request our participants to stay tuned to Vishal sir and attend his programs. So all the presentations and the
I
guidance note
think
referred.
Anshul, just to highlight at EIRC, it is not this topic. The topic is standards on audit implementation by small and medium practitioners. You know, where I'm going to cover that small documentation requirements or satisfying small documentation, how by which we can improve the overall audit quality and audit efficiency. That is what is my objective at the EIRC by taking this topic.
Okay, sir. So we would request our participants to stay tuned to our study circle, and the presentation should be shared with the registered email addresses. So I would request now our secretary of our study circle, Mr. Girdhari Lal Sharma, to offer a formal vote of thanks to Mr. Vishal Doshi, the Vice Chairman of the Accounting and Auditing Standard Board of our institute, for taking 2 hours of his time, valuable time, when he is not in his hometown. He is somewhere in the capital city of India, Delhi, and he has taken the effort to be here and deliberated on such knowledge sharing topic. Girdhari sir, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Ansu. It was a proud privilege to hear Sri Doshi sir on such a vibrant subject. इतने लोगों का इंटरेस्ट था, 300 से प्लस रजिस्ट्रेशन था और अभी 270 तक लोग सर लास्ट तक सुन रहे थे. अभी भी पूछते हैं कि इन्फोसिस टीसीएस का हम लोग कितना काम आएगा, हम लोग तो छोटे-छोटे प्रॉब्लम आएगी वो समझना है. तो वो प्रॉब्लम सर 1-to-1 डिस्कस करके समझी जाएगी. और इट इज वेरी ग्रेट थिंग दैट you are sharing your WhatsApp, so people may WhatsApp the query to you and get the direct reply. और रंजीत सर को भी धन्यवाद सर, जो उन्होंने आज वेलकम एड्रेस किया. और जयनारायण गुप्ता सर ने भी राय शेयर करके अपने थॉट्स इस सब्जेक्ट पे रखे. थैंक्स टू ऑल द पार्टिसिपेंट्स, and this subject is so interesting and you have made it so interesting, sir. Thanks again, sir. Thanks, sir.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
We are looking forward for more seminars on that topic from you, sir.
My pleasure, sir. My pleasure, always. WhatsApp numbers are I have already put in the chat box. So
we'll share it on the chat box again. And I would request our past chairman, EISC past chairman, Mr. Nitesh More, who is the deputy convener of our study circle, to please share his few words
before we conclude the seminar.
To address the gathering, to conclude the gathering.
Nitesh sir.
Over to you, Nitesh sir. Hello, seems to be a technical issue. Over to you, Nitesh sir.
नीतीश
उनको फोन करके बोलना पड़ेगा.
बोलता हूं मैं फिर.
And I would at this point just clarify why I mentioned about TCS Infosys, because as far as my knowledge goes, these are the only two which are available in public domain presently, and that is to get the formats, the way in which the reporting can be done. See, because if I want to start something and I'm getting confused, कि भाई अभी ये table trade payables aging का कैसे देना है, तो at least I can use those to find out कैसे दे सकते हैं as an option. I know they are much higher, but I feel as professionals that is where we have to reach.
So unfortunately, due to some technical issues, we are not having Nitesh More sir on board. So I would request our former regional council member from EIRC, Hariramji, to please take it over and conclude the session. Over to you, Hariramji.
Thank you, Anshul Bhai, for nicely anchoring the whole of the show, and such a nice speaker under the chairmanship of our past chairman EIRC Jayanand Gupta, as well as Nitesh More, and well coordinated by Girdhari Lalji. And thanks to all the participants, without whose active participation throughout the session, the program could not have been so successful. And we hope that a lot of queries has been jumbled up in our mind, and that is the sign of success of the seminar, so that we can go to the books, go to these schedules, go to the balance sheets of TCS and Infosys to clear out our doubts. And more the doubts, more the knowledge sharing. Thank you, sir. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
So, which is the things balance sheet you want me to follow, sir? within the financial statement, you said that will be a guidance for us.
Yes, sir. We'll share it to the registered email addresses, sir.
अंशुल, I will forward it to you. मैंने नितेश जी को तो forward कर दिया है. मैं आपको और हरिराम जी को मैं भी दे देता हूँ, so that in turn you can forward it to others. The presentation as well as the financials.
Okay, sir. Yes, sir. We'll do it, sir. We'll do it.
Thank you everybody. Thanks a lot.
One namaste to Bishal sir and all our regional council members, central council members, and all the participants who have made this webinar very fruitful. Thank you for patience listening.
Thank you everybody.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Nice session.